Welcome to the Friday at 4 podcast series with your host Charles Luttrell and co-host Steve Kent.
Steve,
Sure.
welcome back to the Friday at 4 podcast series. How are you?
I'm doing well, Chuck. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, hanging in there. Another wonderful week. We got a lot to talk about off camera after this episode.
Oh, okay. That
But
sounds
yeah,
a little ominous, but okay.
yeah,
Good stuff.
absolutely. Yeah. So real quick, we have our guest today, Vidar. Vidar, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Neil.
Awesome. We're all great. Thanks for joining us here on the Q.A.C. Team Podcast on Friday at 4. So we'll go ahead and get started with our topic today. So Steve and I had quickly talked about a little bit. I think this came up a couple of weeks ago too, Steve, if I'm not mistaken. We had
Yeah.
kind of touched on this a little bit. And I think it kind of hits home a little bit more. Um, if your team is mocking customers in the background, behind the back, that's a culture problem, not a business problem. That's a tough one, right? You got a broken culture, it can show up everywhere, right? It can show up in your business, show up in your reviews. Um, let's talk a little bit and dive into a little bit more about what this broken culture talks about. What do you think, Steve?
It's a very interesting question, and it can go a million different ways.
Yeah.
But in my mind, it all starts from a business that starts to see either a decline in revenue, some negative reviews, something that's not working the way it should. And again, that could go a million ways. So the smart business owner says, okay, something's not right. How do I figure out what it is? What's going on? And there's any number of things they can do. They can look at reviews. They can talk to customers. They can put cameras, hidden cameras. They can do any number of things to see what's really going on. And based on what they see, again, the smart business owner takes the action. So one thing which we can hone in on based on the question, the topic of the day is what happens when it's your employees? Now, that, again, that could come from the videos, the reviews. It could come from anything. So when I was in corporate for a long time and something didn't work, the first thing I did, and again, it may or may not be in retail because I was in a company, but the first thing I did was to look at, is there a written process of what's supposed to happen?
Some protocol,
Then,
right?
yeah, an operating procedure, if you will.
Yeah.
Then from the operating procedure, were the staff trained on that procedure? So if there's no operating procedure, then it's the business owner's fault. If there is a procedure and the employees aren't following it, that's the training aspect. And again, that's the employer, the business owner. But if the employees have been trained and are not following it, now it's whatever corrective action wants to be taken. And in a short summary, that's kind of been my experience. And I always, again, IT world, put the onus on the process, the procedures, then the staff. I always gave the benefit to the staff just in case.
Yeah.
So,
And what's crazy, right? As you talk about staff and protocols and procedures, it goes deeper now, right? Because this topic can also go towards the owner, right? So the owner who loses control of her staff, right? That means she lost control of the business as well. So now that is a bigger issue. So we're going to take it over to Vidar a little bit, let him introduce himself, who he is. And Vidar, give us your opinion a little bit on what we're talking about here.
Sure. So my background is mostly startups over here. So I've spent 30 years doing technology stuff, but largely in startups. And One of the interesting things for me with this topic is that technology teams are often like kept in the back room and are very rarely given exposure to customers or trained how to work with customers. So it's a very mixed bag how well people are handling it. Um, it took getting into a large corporate for a short period, like 10 years into my career, before I got any kind of formal training in anything
Mm.
outside of, my technology background from university. Because we were just expected to, well, that's what we needed. We needed the computer science background. But a lot of us were in roles where we had to constantly deal with stakeholders that might be customers
Right.
and
Absolutely.
had perhaps never been put in that kind of situation or trained in any kind of way on how to deal with customers. So some people did well, but I worked with a lot of people who had no idea how to deal with that situation.
So I'm going to throw something out here. From my experience, there are two types of customers. There's your external customer, who is your retail store, somebody walks in, whatever it is. But then there's your internal customer, who, when you do a function, who inside your company then takes your finished work product and then
Mm,
does something else to it. So it's like an assembly line. Person one finishes something, they give it to person two, they work on it, they give it to person three. So, and again, my background, like yours, is in the IT space, but
mm,
I always had that internal customer.
yeah,
So whether it's internal or external, I think the same issue holds because
yeah, absolutely.
internally, you're not going to get the Google reviews. Hopefully not. Okay. But
That would be an
internally,
odd one, right? For Chuck to see Google reviews on internal
yeah, really, there you go.
customers.
So that's it. We got to bring Chuck in. Great idea. I love that.
Yeah.
But how do you then handle that internal problem? Because if internally you have those issues, then the finished product to the consumer, to the client, is either late, poor quality,
Yeah,
more expensive than it should have been. So there's really two sides with the same end result of the business owner has to take responsibility, but there's two sides to that.
absolutely. And I think, a lot of technology teams struggle with that as well because they, a lot, very often because they lack alignment with the overall business.
Hmm.
I've seen so many companies where the technology team's understanding of what the company's product is completely different from what the suite sees it as. And it might even be so bad in some cases that the CTO doesn't understand what is actually being sold. And it's a real problem. And I see this actually one of my first big corporate experience was with Yahoo back in the day. I mean, we're talking 20 years ago.
That's a name from the
And
past.
Yeah.
exactly. And the technology team at Yahoo tended to see Yahoo as a technology company, but
Hmm.
Yahoo was a media and advertising company.
Got it.
That was their business. That was what they were making money on. They
Yeah.
needed eyeballs, and the technology was entirely incidental.
Mm.
And the technology team really struggled to see that. And that was one of the big problems for Yahoo, was that there was like this fundamental disconnect there with a bunch of geeks that thought they were going to be building cool technology, whereas the business just wanted eyeballs. And, they certainly didn't manage to reconcile that while I was there. And we've seen
Wow.
how it's gone since as well. But this is a problem in all kinds of sizes of companies where you have these teams that don't understand what the business is really about
Right.
and often shows a lot of disdain for it. I mean, technology teams in particular tends to be like there's an open disdain for like marketing and sales. There's like no end to the amount of mockery. But these are the guys that are gonna actually make you the money to pay for all of the stuff that that we are building and using.
Right. I think the interesting thing too, Steve, right, is that it hits everything, right? Because not only does it hit, the owner and the employees and the customer, but then it hits the ego, right? The culture and the customer experience, right? All at once. It all ties together, right? Because it really forms that cloud, right? Of it can be a gray cloud or a white cloud or a blue cloud, right? That looms over your business with how this all fits together, right?
And I've been in companies where, to Vidar's point, the staff, the teams are not given the bigger picture. So you end up working in silos and sometimes against each other. So yeah, so you have two silos, both things that their work is more important, is more complicated, that I'm better than you, you're better than the next person. It can't end well. It can't.
Right.
If everybody's not aligned going in, and I'm not saying everybody's going to be 100% because that's not realistic. But if, at least in a general statement, we're going down the same road, you have a better chance of success.
Yeah. And if those two silos don't know what each other do and how they fit into the bigger picture, that creates a whole another issue, right? Because now you got one silo working against the other, and they have no idea how they work together in the company. They're just chugging along, doing their thing, and getting feedback on how they're doing their job, right?
Yeah.
It can be really disastrous. I mean, a lot of my work has been in startups where money is tight, right? And you end up with, I've seen cases, for example, where I've seen the pitch deck that went to the VC in the first place, and I know what kind of projections, what their market size is, how large part of that market they expect to take. And then I talk to the technology team, and they think that they're building a product for a market that is like 10 times larger than the total possible largest market for this business. And they are spending money accordingly because they think they're building something that needs like 100 million users to be successful, but maybe in their niche there's only 10 million people, right? And so realistically they're going to be capturing maybe 1 million. And so you're building something for a scale that is 100 times larger than what it could possibly be, and what waste an enormous amount of resources in the process. And that kills companies. It's like, it's not just the culture, it kills companies.
I think that goes back to, I think it's called the Napoleon complex, where you're small, but you try to make yourself bigger. And I could be wrong. Psychology is not my forte, by any stretch, but I think that's what it's good. That's why a lot of times, if you ever see a Chihuahua, a really small dog, that they look to be very vicious because they're scared because they're so small. They're trying to look bigger. And that kind of is similar to what we're describing here, is you really have 1 million, but you're building it for 100 million when there's only 10 million total. So it's the same thing you just described. And I'm agreeing with you. I think it's the right, not the right, but that is the thought process that is used by a lot of people.
Yeah,
It's
you
also
nailed it.
something that's it's also something that's being kind of reinforced by a lot of culture around, you need to be prepared to scale and you need to be prepared to grow fast and that kind of thing. If people are then not given corrections from their own leadership and being told that, well, yeah, that's fine, but this is what our business is like, this is the box we're fitting in, this is what we're actually building for, then you fall back to the sort of common wisdom that it might be shaped by reading articles by people in companies that are 100 times the size, right? And everybody's looking to the big successes.
Yep.
And they're looking at, well, what are those big successes doing now instead of what did they do when they were our size?
And I was
So,
going to nail on that too, right, Steve? I was going to say, if you look at it from the small business perspective, right, you have a team of 8 people, not 800 people.
mhm,
How that really affects more, because now that smaller team has to be more effective, has to understand more, because if you have 3 of the 8 people who aren't understanding of your culture, how they fit into what their roles are at your company, it can really be disastrous for a small business, because now you have 3 disconnected people, right? You got 5 connected. Those 5 people can really be like, well, what are you doing here? Because these people don't know what they're doing, right? Then the left hand and right hand, they don't know what they're doing with each other. And
yep,
next thing you know,
yep.
it implodes. And then that business can go under quickly, right?
So this is where the owner of the business, regardless of which business, regardless of size, the owner either themselves or has to have somebody or multiple people under them who looks at the scope of work. And I know, Vidar, you've heard this term, scope creep. Um, and it
Have to
is
go.
because if the
Yeah.
scope says build something for 100 people, and all of a sudden they start building something for 1 million people, to Vidar's example, somebody early enough needs to look at different milestones and say, where are you in the process? It could be you're building a software project. It could be you're selling widgets in a store. If you're not selling the number of widgets or they're late to market or anything else, somewhere early on, somebody needs to step up and say, are we on target? Time-wise, budget-wise? If we're not, stop it in its tracks before it goes completely off the rails and say why.
Yeah. And that's the bigger issue, right? When you have a business owner who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't clearly understand or clearly articulate the goals of the
Mm-hmm.
business, right? Then you have a problem, because that
Mm-hmm.
train derails because nobody knows what they're doing.
Yep.
But they go out there and think they know what they're doing. They just try to do the best they can, but they have no direction, right? And that's
Right.
where the
They don't.
culture piece comes in, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the term absentee management?
Oh, yeah. That's a good
That's
one.
exactly what, well, not exactly, but one of the things for absentee management is what we're talking about today. If that manager owner is not around, not asking the questions, not holding people accountable, you're going to go off the rails. And then you can't really sit there and say, what happened? Because you weren't there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Vidar, let's talk a little bit more about, what you do and how you do things, because how does this fit into your world, right? Are you an independent owner? Do you have a team under you? Let's talk a little bit more about how that works for you.
Yeah, so I mean, I run a small consultancy, so I have a few people doing like freelance work with me, but I'm keeping it small. I don't really have a sort of an interest in growing it very large, because I like basically I started out doing contracting just myself,
Mm,
after having done a lot of, you know, a few decades of startup work basically. And getting to the stage where I was being too expensive to keep on staff all the time,
mm,
basically.
okay.
And then, as things have gone along, eventually I bring in somebody else to help me deliver projects. And yeah, so I mean, I go into a lot of technology teams where, there's gaps, and that means I get to see a lot of teams that, well, a lot of them are great, but there's usually something dysfunctional in every team, right? And so you get to see a lot of that. And especially when I come into teams that are in transition, where leadership is, changing and stuff like that, and I'm being brought in to fix one aspect of what happens during that transition, you tend to see a lot of interesting dynamics going on that fits right into this. especially when it comes to an internal customers. And sometimes you have companies where the culture is just spot on and everybody gets that communication top down and it's very structured. I have a client now where I feel that the leadership team is reporting very transparently, very regularly. And I can see that flowing down and people know what the company is doing. But I've also, as I mentioned, been in companies where I've seen the pitch deck and I've seen what the people on the ground actually think the business is doing, and they're not the same at all.
Not even on the same path, right?
Oof.
Exactly.
Right.
So, and I've seen cases where the teams that I've gone into have like open disdain for what the company is actually trying to achieve, and it's not just that they don't know; it's just that they don't want it to be that, right? You have you tend to find that in certain types of companies where it's at odds with what geeks tend to like, but they work there anyway because the pay is good. But then it's really hard to keep the team aligned with the mission. Like
It is.
companies that it's hard to find a techie that doesn't run an ad blocker, for example. If you're working in a company that makes all their living of ads, there's going to be tensions, and some people are fine navigating that and some are not.
It's a challenge because, and again, in my mind, from my experience, some people do align with the company mission.
Mm.
Some people don't because they align with their own mission. And that's always a balance of how do you bring the outliers back in? Because sometimes those outliers could be your really key team members.
Yeah.
You got to bring them in because if you don't bring them in the right way, they walk out the door. So there's that balance to keep your company afloat, but still get done what you need to get done.
Yeah, or they just
You
go
know,
rogue. I had
Right.
I had a startup ages and ages ago where that really could not afford it, but this one, that person that should have been a key contributor basically went off and did his own thing for 6 months without anybody really knowing. He was like keeping enough things going that it wasn't noticed that he like rebuilt a core system by himself and spent most of his time on that. And then he just suddenly came in one day and said, "Oh, here we're going to replace this piece with that piece." There was no value delivered by it. It was just purely because he felt like this was better technically for him.
Great.
And it's
Yep.
One thing I like about how I tie into this is that when I would do the mystery shopping first time around years ago, owners were quite surprised to see what I'd find and how it didn't really fit into their vision of what their business model was about. Then that allowed them to adjust the report to what they wanted. So as their shoppers would go in and do the reporting, week after week, month after month, and then you start getting the reports built up. Then you could see the data, the real-time data of, okay, now I see how it's starting to fit into what my vision is, so you can build the culture around what you thought you were doing, but wasn't really happening. And that kind of ties today, right, with the reviews. I go in and do my show, I can create that star performance index that gives you that data upfront already that shows you your competitors, shows you what you've done, and then you have that business. So it kind of ties into, what you think your culture is, what your culture really is. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Could be two different things.
Three different things, right?
Yeah, three, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
This is kind of
An
like
eye-opener,
interesting
right?
because it's like in a sense when you're coming in as a consultant or contractor in a team, you kind of get in that kind of same position. Because I go into a lot of teams where I'm functioning as an independent contributor on the team, and I get to talk to the people like on the ground. But at the same time, I will often be reporting to somebody very senior because I'm in there to solve a specific problem, and I'm not cheap. And So I tend to be talking to, CTO level, VP
Yeah.
level, that kind of thing. And the people doing the work at the ground, and what the messaging I'm getting from about the company tends to be very different. And
Yeah.
often the lessons they get out of that, out of getting a back channel, even though I'm not going to throw anybody under a bus kind of thing, but I will explain the issues they're having, is often more valuable than the actual technical work I'm doing, because they
Right.
learn a lot about what's
Yeah,
going
that was
on.
going to be my question that you answered for me. I was going to ask you, do you have any pushback? Do you have any problems when you have to work with teams that maybe aren't on the same page as you, or they don't want to, respect the fact that they have somebody that's trying to consult with them, you know?
So yeah, so it's interesting. So I one of the things that I find is that when you're working, especially with technical teams, the big challenge if you're coming in as a consultant and stuff like that is you need to prove yourself very, very quickly. They need to see that you actually know the technical bits, because when they hear consultant, a lot of them will think, oh yeah, this is a pencil pusher that's going to be writing reports and not doesn't know what they're doing. But I've been doing hands-on work for 30 years in this space. It's very rare that I come into an organization and there are a lot of people that are more senior than me in terms of the hands-on experience. But at the same time, because I've been doing startups, I have been dealing with decision makers the whole time, and or been one of the top decision makers. I've been on boards. I've reported to boards and report to the C-suite. So I'm used to sort of straddling that divide. But yeah, with the tech team, you need to really demonstrate that very, very quickly. And I remember actually in that case, the tables were the other way. I was on staff, and we brought in an outsourced team. And initially, it was very clear that they thought I was like a bureaucrat. I didn't know, they didn't think I knew what I was doing. And
Yeah.
then one of my colleagues quietly pointed them to my GitHub profile. So for those not aware what GitHub is, basically it's a hosting site for source code projects you've written. And mine is full of stuff going back 20 years with, very deep technical research and that kind of thing.
Right.
And their attitude just flipped immediately. It was like
Yeah.
suddenly they listened to everything I was saying. And but you really just need to be aware of that with certain types of teams. If you don't like prove yourself right away, they're not going to respect you.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
they're gonna,
Right.
Yeah. Now, what a great segue, to tell our audience how we can reach you, how we can contact you or use your services.
Yeah, so my website is hokstadconsulting.com, but also just search for my name. I'm in the fortunate or unfortunate, depending on circumstances, position that my name is globally unique. So if you search for Vidar Hokstad, everything that comes up is about me. I have nowhere to hide.
You
Could
know
be a
where
good
to
thing or a
hide.
bad thing, but okay.
Well, look, Steve can't
But
hide
yes,
because look at the screen, right? 516-727-2294.
And Chuck, you
but
just
yes,
went
you'll find
away.
me on
Go.
LinkedIn. I see probably the easiest other than my website.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. And Chuck's number is 410-935-6132. One of these days I'll memorize it, but okay.
I was just going to say that. So, Steve, we've been doing this for 86 times now, man. You should know my number by now.
I'm a slow learner.
Slow learner. Vidar, you got that, right?
No comment.
No comment.
He said no
Smart
comment.
answer. No
Keep
comment.
himself neutral. He's already understanding their culture. See that?
Yeah, he is. He is. Good job, Vicar.
Yeah. I think great topic today. I think it fit for all of us, right? Because we all from, Vidar from a bigger global standpoint,
Mm,
of how he fit into that picture of that culture issue that could be there or a non-culture issue.
hmm
Me coming from, independent consultant by myself, Steve working for himself and a mid-sized company. Right? I don't think they're too
Yeah, we're around
huge yet.
5,000 people. So
Yeah,
it's a
so you're
nice size
still
company.
mid, right? Yes. I think we have a good mix of, what we talked about today. I think it goes a long way to say that even from the very top, all the way down to your startup employee or someone you just hired, I think it's important to make sure that everybody along that line is on board, right? With the culture, with whatever, the business owner, what their vision is for their company. So everybody can really, follow along and understand what we're trying to accomplish. So those two silos aren't working against each other, right?
Correct. Makes sense. A lot of that comes from a new employee has to go through, depending on the size of the company, some type of onboarding. And in that onboarding, they should get something that says, here's what the company's about, here's their mission, here's their vision, here's where you fit in, this is the direction we're going. They need to know that day one.
Yeah, well, here's my onboarding for my latest company I worked for, probably about 10 years ago now. Here's your laptop, here's your team, figure it out.
Mhm.
So I did.
Wow.
That was my onboarding. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I've been there. I've seen that.
Vidar's like, I'm not saying anything.
No, I mean, I've absolutely seen this as well. There's a company I did a contract for a few years back where I was basically left to my own devices throughout the contract. There was like no check-in, no nothing, and I had to guess. Basically, I had to divine what it was they expected from
Jeez.
nothing. And that's not a situation that is going to end well. So luckily we parted on good terms at the end of it, but I was not happy with what I did, what I delivered, because I was in a situation where, well, I had to guess everything, and it's not a good position to be in.
No, it's not.
It's not. It is not. Well, let's see. Vidar from the UK, right? That's where you're from.
Well, I'm from Norway actually, but I've lived
Okay.
in UK for 26 years now.
Wow. So you're in Norway. Wow. So man, we're reaching the globe today in this podcast. I love it.
We
So
are.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us and sharing your part of our topic today and your story. And Steve, as usual, I appreciate you coming on and joining in this conversation again with me. I think it's been a good one. Every week we say that, it's just 2 or 3 people, and this podcast we talk about a topic, and it's non-scripted. We don't talk about what we're doing prior to this. We don't have a script put together. It's just of us getting together and talking about our thoughts about a topic, and I really appreciate that. And it's I think this one hits for me because I really want companies, especially small businesses, to really think about their culture and think about how they're running their business. Are they chatting it up about customers? Are they, really making sure that their team is a team and a whole team and really working together, not these separate silos where you're working against each other. Is the front of the house, not understand what the back of the house does. And in Vidar's case, he goes into a company trying to fix some IT things, and well, do they really know what I'm doing here? It's like these things have to really work and work together, right? Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's been an interesting topic. Yeah.
It is.
Well, we're about out of time. I appreciate you guys coming on again on a Friday at 4 because
It's 4 o'clock somewhere.
Steve, I love it. Vidar, thanks again for coming on. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Vidar.
your input.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, guys, have a great rest of the day. Have a great
You too.
weekend, and we will talk soon.
You got it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Vidar.
Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye.
You too.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
You've been watching the Friday at 4 podcast series with your host Charles Luttrell and co-host Steve Kent. Thanks for watching.